They say the scariest sound in the world isn't screaming. It's silence. The kind that hits you the moment your alarm goes off at 6:03 a.m. and you wake up to a life you're not even sure you chose. The silence of a soul aching for more, but stuck in a body that doesn't move. A mind that once dreamt big now recites the same loop. Not today, maybe tomorrow. But what if tomorrow never comes? That's the question Eliza faced the morning she found herself standing on the edge of the Williamsburg Bridge, not to jump, but to escape. Not from life, but from a version of herself she couldn't carry anymore. She wasn't broken. She was bored, tired, spiritually starved. She had done everything right. College degree, stable job, decent apartment. But inside, she was unraveling. Her mornings were a blur of caffeine, social media scrolls, and a desperate attempt to feel something before logging into another soulless Zoom call. Then one morning, something shifted. She didn't get up, didn't grab her phone. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and whispered 3 words that would change her life. I am ready. But ready for what? She didn't know yet. That was the point. Those words weren't a celebration. They were a rebellion. A quiet, powerful revolt against everything that told her she wasn't enough. She walked to the mirror, grabbed a dry erase marker from her junk drawer, and scrawled it on the glass. I am ready. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't even straight. But it was real. And for the first time in years, so was she. She wasn't ready because life got easier. She was ready because she stopped waiting for it to. Stoic philosophy isn't about detachment or being emotionless. It's about discipline of thought. It's about training your soul to face life, not in armor, but in truth. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't being poetic. He was handing us a weapon. Eliza began her own training. She created what she called the Readiness Journal, a 3-line entry every morning before opening her inbox. What challenge am I most likely to face today? What inner quality can I rely on to meet it? What truth do I need to remember when I feel like giving up? Some mornings the answers were bold: fear, courage, nothing lasts forever. Other mornings they were soft: doubt, patience, breathe. But every entry was a brick, and every day she laid another, building something no one could take away: her foundation. This is what I am ready really means. It doesn't mean fearless. It means faithful to your ability to rise, even if you've fallen 1,000 times. It's not about predicting what the day will bring. It's about choosing who you'll be when it comes. And here's the secret Eliza learned. Readiness is magnetic. It draws the right people, the right opportunities, the right energy. It shifts your inner gravity. You stop attracting chaos and start commanding clarity. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become unshakable. So tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone or your coffee, reach for yourself. Stand in front of that mirror, not to fix your hair or your flaws, but to find your focus. And whisper this with your whole chest. I am ready. Not for perfection, not for ease, but for whatever this wild, wonderful life has planned for you. If this story hit you somewhere deeper than expected, maybe that's not an accident. Maybe this is your wake-up call too. And if you felt this, really felt it, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel. It lets me know you're out there, that this message matters, and it gives me the fuel to keep creating stories like this every week for people like you who are ready to reclaim their mornings and their lives. Now, here's a question for you, just for fun, just for you. What's the first thing you say to yourself in the morning? A. Ugh. Not again. B. Let's go. Comment A or B down below. I read every response. Let's start a conversation about the power of the first thought. There's a moment each day when Jackson, 24, locks the cafe door after closing shift and just stands there, still in his apron, staring at his reflection in the front glass. The neon lights behind him flicker across the window, warping his image until he barely recognizes himself. Not because he looks different, but because inside he's still searching for something he can't name. When Jackson first moved to Austin, he told himself this was temporary. The barista job, the shared studio apartment, the poetry open mics at underground bookstores. A way station, not a destination. But 2 years passed, and somewhere between latte art competitions and TikTok algorithms that screamed who he should be, he forgot how to measure his worth without someone else's scale. He remembers the night that broke him. His father, on a call from back home, said with well-meaning concern, "So, when are you going to get serious about your life?" The silence that followed carved something hollow into Jackson's chest. Not because the question hurt, but because part of him believed it. That night he took a long walk along the river, headphones on, drowning in doubt, until he heard a quote that stopped him cold. "You are not your role, you are your reason." It wasn't even Stoic. It was from an old podcast buried in his queue, but the truth of it cracked something open. Jackson didn't lack direction. He lacked authority over his own narrative. For too long, he'd outsourced it to others, family, social media, even strangers. Every like, every rejection, every passive-aggressive comment about his future had quietly chipped away at his self-trust. That night, he opened the Notes app on his phone and typed 4 words that became his new compass. "I define my worth." He began collecting moments, small affirmations of who he really was, beyond titles and timelines. A text from a friend saying, "I always feel calmer after we talk." A picture of his first poem published in a local zine. A note he found in the tip jar, "Thanks for listening when I needed it." He called it his inner worth vault. And unlike anything online, this space couldn't be liked, judged, or algorithmically ranked. It just was. Real. Raw. His. He also started asking himself harder questions. What do I value? What kind of man do I want to be when no one's watching? What would I still create if no one ever saw it? And slowly the fog began to lift. The Stoics never promised confidence. They promised clarity. Epictetus said, "Know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly." Jackson began rebuilding from that truth. His morning started with one intentional decision. What am I doing for me today? Not to impress, not to earn approval, but to align. That shift changed everything. He still made coffee, still heard passive jabs about his choices, but something inside had recalibrated. He didn't need applause. He had alignment. And alignment is stronger than praise. Self-worth, he realized, isn't a reward. It's a responsibility. You don't wait to feel worthy. You choose to believe it and act like it, even on days when doubt screams louder than your name. It's not always perfect. Some nights he still feels small, still wonders if he's behind. But then he returns to that vault, that inner room of remembered truth, and breathes. Because no matter how loud the world gets, there's a place inside him now that stays quiet, solid, unshaken. That's where his worth lives. Not in diplomas or promotions, but in how he treats people when no one's watching. In the words he writes when he's afraid no one will read them. In the integrity he chooses when compromise would be easier. You define your worth by the life you live, not the life others expect of you. And when you start living from that place, something radical happens. The noise loses power. The world doesn't get quieter, but you get clearer. So tomorrow, before you measure yourself by followers or finances, ask instead, did I stay true? Did I show up with heart? Did I honor my values even when no one clapped? Because if you did, you're not just enough. You're aligned, and that kind of worth, no one can take away. Michelle didn't plan to hike alone. Not really. It just happened after everything else fell apart. The breakup, the burnout, the sudden realization that her dream job in San Francisco was draining her more than it was building her. It was late. October, when she booked a cabin near Yosemite, packed one bag, turned off all her notifications, and drove for hours with no playlist, just silence and something aching beneath it. She thought maybe she'd find clarity out there in the woods. Maybe nature would hand her a revelation, like a movie moment, the kind where the camera pans out, the music swells, and suddenly everything makes sense. But when she arrived, it didn't feel cinematic. It felt disorienting. She stood among towering trees and realized she hadn't been fully present in months, maybe years. Her mind had always been elsewhere, rehashing yesterday, anticipating tomorrow, always sprinting ahead or running from behind. That first night in the cabin, surrounded by pine and darkness, Michelle sat on the porch and whispered, a sentence that felt both foreign and familiar. I am here, now, not, I'll be okay. Not, I'll figure it out. Just that. A grounding, a declaration, a prayer. The next morning, she took her first solo hike. No earbuds, no phone camera, no destination, just motion. Her breath synced with her steps. Her thoughts wandered, then returned. When she reached a clearing, she paused and looked out over the valley. The view was stunning. But it wasn't the mountains that moved her. It was the stillness. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't running from her past or bargaining with her future. She was just there, awake, present, alive. The Stoics spoke often of presence. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future." Michelle used to read quotes like that and roll her eyes. But now, those words felt like lifelines, because she finally understood how many moments she'd missed chasing imaginary ones. She began to build a new habit she called presence pauses. At random points in the day, she'd stop, completely. Whether sipping coffee or folding laundry, she'd let go of everything but that moment. What am I hearing right now? What do I feel in my body? What do I smell, touch, notice? It was awkward. At first, her mind fought it, tried to fill the silence, but slowly, her nervous system began to recalibrate. Back in the city weeks later, the noise returned. The emails, deadlines, social plans, and endless scroll. But Michelle didn't fall back into the storm. She carried something out of the woods, an awareness, a new rule. Wherever your feet are, be there fully. It changed the way she worked. Instead of multitasking her way through Zoom meetings, she listened, actually listened. It changed how she loved. Instead of checking her phone at dinner, she locked eyes and gave presence like it was a gift, and it changed how she spoke to herself. When anxiety whispered worst-case scenarios, she whispered back, "Not yet. Right. Now I'm safe. Right now, I'm okay." The truth is, most of our suffering doesn't come from what's happening. It comes from what we think might happen or what we wish had happened. The mind spins, the heart races, and the moment, the only one we truly have, slips through our fingers like smoke. Michelle isn't perfect at presence. No one is. But she returns to it like a home, a breath, a decision. Because the present isn't just a peaceful place, it's a powerful one. It's where clarity lives, where strength begins, where life happens. So the next time you find yourself rushing, worrying, spiraling, try this. Stop, breathe. Feel the weight of your feet on the floor, the air in your lungs, the warmth of light on your skin. Say it, not like a mantra, but like a truth you're finally ready to believe. I am here. Now, because until you learn to live in this moment, you'll miss all the ones that matter. And those moments, they're your life. There was a time when Noah used to measure his entire life in milestones. Job promotions, annual reviews, pay bumps, that next big step. And for a while, it worked, until it didn't. Until one ordinary Tuesday, he sat alone in his Seattle apartment, staring at a half-finished project on his screen, and realized he hadn't felt proud in months. Not because he wasn't achieving things, but because he was no longer evolving. Progress had become performance, motion without meaning. For weeks after that, he spiraled quietly. He went to work, hit his deadlines, showed up in meetings, but inside, a question haunted him. Is this who I'm supposed to be? Forever? It wasn't depression, it was stagnation. Something harder to name and easier to ignore. But Noah couldn't ignore it anymore. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't growing, and that frightened him more than failure ever could. One night, while cleaning his kitchen, he noticed a dry erase board on the fridge he hadn't touched in months. It still had an old grocery list scribbled in fading marker. Without thinking, he wiped it clean and wrote 3 words. I am becoming. Not I will be. Not I should be. Not I used to be. Just that. A reminder that growth doesn't wait for a permission slip. It happens in the quiet, in the subtle, in the spaces no one claps for. Noah started a new ritual. Every evening, before brushing his teeth, he'd write 1 line on that board. One small thing he did that day that made him feel like he was growing. Some nights it was simple. I listened without interrupting. Other nights it was subtle. I stopped working at 6 p.m. and took a walk instead of chasing that last email. They weren't achievements. They were acts of alignment. The Stoics believed that virtue wasn't found in status, but in effort. Seneca wrote, "While we teach, we learn." Progress to the Stoics wasn't measured in awards. It was measured in who you became while trying. Noah clung to that. He realized that even when his work didn't go viral, even when no one noticed, the hours he put in, he noticed. And that noticing, the quiet recognition of your own becoming, is sacred. He also began to forgive himself more. For the slow days, the backslides, the moments of doubt, because growth is never linear. It curves, it pauses, it rests, but it never stops if you stay awake to it. And that changed everything. His career didn't explode, his title didn't change, but he did. He became someone who smiled more in meetings, someone who gave grace to his co-workers, someone who started mentoring a new hire, not because it was part of the job, but because it reminded him of who he used to be and who he still could become. One night, after a particularly long day, Noah stood in front of the board and hesitated. Nothing had gone right. A code push failed. He had to cancel dinner plans. He felt impatient and short-tempered all day. But instead of walking away, he picked up the marker and wrote, I apologized. When I snapped at my teammate, that was it. One small repair in a day full of static. But it counted, because growth isn't about perfection. It's about presence and courage and honesty. If you're waiting to feel like you've arrived, you'll wait forever. Because becoming isn't a destination. It's a posture, a way of showing up. A quiet vow to improve, even if the only person who notices is you. So if today felt like a step backward, pause before you judge. Ask yourself instead, what did I learn? What did I practice? What small way did I lean toward my better self, even if only for a moment? You are becoming, not someday, not soon, now. Let that truth settle deep. Let it soften the urgency and sharpen your intention. Because who you're becoming matters more than who you've been. And every step you take, even the shaky ones, are sacred parts of your becoming. David had always been known as the guy who kept his cool until he wasn't. It was a Tuesday morning in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of day that begins rushed and stays tense. The boardroom buzzed with quiet hostility. A client was throwing blame like grenades, dissecting every detail of a campaign that had fallen short of expectations. David sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, shoulders locked. His team watched him closely, half expecting him to erupt. A year ago, he probably would have, but instead of reacting, he breathed. Not a deep meditative breath, just a simple inhale that reminded him, this is a moment, and I get to choose who I'll be in it. He waited 3 seconds, then replied, not with defense, but with clarity. He didn't win the room with dominance. He earned its respect with discipline. And later, when his team thanked him for staying cool, David didn't smile because of the compliment. He smiled because they didn't see the storm he'd wrestled inside. That moment wasn't luck, it was practice. Years earlier, David had been someone who let the world pull his strings. A bad driver ruined his morning. A curt email sent him spiraling. He wasn't impulsive, he was unconscious, living on autopilot, reacting, always reacting. Until one evening, after yelling at his son over spilled juice, He saw his reflection in the microwave door and didn't recognize the man staring back. That night, he sat on the floor of the kitchen and wrote a single sentence in his notebook. I choose my response. It was part apology, part vow, not to never get angry, but to own what came next. He started building what he later called the response ritual. Simple steps, 3 seconds of pause, 1 deep breath, a mental check-in. What outcome do I want right now? It didn't make him perfect, it made him present. The Stoics taught that we have no control over external events, only over how we interpret and respond to them. Epictetus reminded his students that power lies not in changing the world, but in mastering our reactions to it. David had read those words before, but now he was living them. The shift didn't happen overnight. He still failed, snapped, regretted, but every time he caught himself, he'd return to that phrase. I choose my response. He posted it above his desk, set it as a reminder on his phone, not as pressure, but as permission. Permission to step outside of the spiral, to not take the bait, to not mirror someone else's chaos. And over time, something changed. His wife noticed he listened more. His son started confiding in him again. Even his colleagues began turning to him during high-pressure meetings, not because he had all the answers, but because he was the one who didn't collapse under pressure. He became a thermostat, not a thermometer. He didn't just reflect the heat of the room, he set its tone. What most people never understand is that composure isn't weakness, it's strength, forged in restraint. It's knowing that the loudest person in the room often has the least control. That real power isn't in dominating others, it's in refusing to let them dominate you. Choosing your response means you refuse to be emotionally outsourced. You stop handing your peace to strangers, bad days, or even your past. It doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you integrate them, own them, respond from your values, not your wounds. David learned to ask himself 3 questions in every hard moment. What am I feeling? What story am I telling myself about this? What would the best version of me do next? It wasn't therapy. It was self-command, because when life squeezes you, through stress, conflict, or disappointment, it doesn't create your character, it reveals it. And the ability to respond consciously is what separates wisdom from reactivity, growth from regret. So next time someone cuts you off in traffic or criticizes your work or says something that scrapes an old wound, pause. Just pause. In that space, however small, is your sovereignty. And in that sovereignty lies your power, not to control others, but to control yourself. And that is enough to change everything. At 3:17 a.m., the world outside the hospital windows feels paused, like time itself is holding its breath. Inside, fluorescent lights hum quietly, the night shift trudges on, and Ava, 41, cradles a newborn child in her arms. The baby's mother, pale and exhausted, is asleep just feet away, barely stirring. There's no applause, no camera to capture the moment, no social media post waiting to be shared. But Ava knows something holy is happening. She's not just holding a life, she's holding purpose. Years ago, Ava would have dismissed this moment. She used to believe her life had to be louder to matter. Back then, she imagined that legacy meant big things. Titles, accolades, a story worth broadcasting. But the years humbled her in ways ambition never could. She's seen families fall, apart in emergency rooms. She's watched people take their last breaths without anyone there to hold their hand. She's heard apologies whispered through oxygen masks, and she's seen forgiveness passed between strangers like a secret. She's come to believe something radical, that legacy isn't built in milestones, it's built in moments. Ava doesn't wear a cape. She wears scrubs that smell like sanitizer and sweat. She doesn't give TED Talks. She gives comfort. She changes IVs. She whispers calm into chaos. And she's learned that the things people remember, really remember, aren't the awards or the headlines. They're the small kindnesses. The way someone made them feel when everything else was falling apart. She started something years ago to help her hold on to this truth. A simple nightly practice she calls the impact reflection. Before bed, no matter how exhausted she is, she writes down one moment from her shift where she made a difference. It doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes it's just held a patient's hand when they were scared, or told a joke that made the janitor laugh. These moments, collected like lanterns, light the path back to meaning on the days she forgets. The Stoics believed that virtue is its own reward. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one." Ava doesn't need anyone's approval to know she's living with integrity. She carries it in the quiet dignity of her choices, in the way she shows up, even when no one sees, especially when no one sees. There's a story Ava never tells, not even to her closest friends. Years ago, a young patient coded on her watch. Despite her best efforts, he didn't make it. She went home that morning hollowed out and haunted, questioning every move she made. But a week later, the boy's father returned, not to accuse, but to thank her. He said, "You were kind to him. You didn't treat him like a case. You treated him like a son." That moment didn't erase the pain, but it planted something deeper. The understanding that how we do things matters just as much as what we do. It's easy to overlook the quiet lives, the ones not chasing followers or building empires. But those lives often hold the most light. Ava knows this now. She sees it in the tired eyes of her fellow night shift nurses, in the EMTs who haven't had a warm meal in 12 hours, in the cafeteria worker who remembers everyone's name. They aren't invisible, they're essential, and so is their impact. Every day, Ava wakes up and chooses to believe one simple thing: I matter. Not because someone told her, not because she's been rewarded for it, but because she shows up with love, with attention, and with an open heart. And that's what legacy really is. It's not what you build that people can see. It's what you give that they feel. It's the ripples of kindness, integrity, and presence that carry on long after you leave the room. So if you've ever questioned your worth because your life isn't loud, remember Ava. Remember this moment. And ask yourself, not what the world thinks of you, but how you make others feel when they're in your presence. You matter, even in the smallest of moments, especially in them. And the light you leave behind doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to be real. 6 different lives, 6 different cities, 6 different struggles that, at first glance, had nothing in common. But as we followed Eliza, Jackson, Michelle, Noah, David, and Ava, a single thread began to appear, a golden truth woven through each of their quiet revolutions. Your life is not defined by the chaos around you, but by the clarity within you. Eliza taught us that readiness isn't a feeling, it's a decision. That sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is simply stand in front of a mirror, look yourself in the eyes and say, "I'm showing up anyway." She stopped waiting for the perfect moment to begin living and realized that the moment she chose herself, that was enough. Jackson reminded us that worth isn't something you chase, it's something you claim. He stepped away from the noisy expectations of family, society, and strangers online and turned inward, building his inner worth vault, a living memory of who he is when no one's watching and who he's becoming. On his own terms, Michelle gave us a glimpse into the power of presence. In the stillness of Yosemite, she discovered what years of ambition had buried. That this very moment, with its quiet simplicity, is not an obstacle to success, but the birthplace of it. When you choose to be where your feet are, your soul can finally rest and rise at the same time. Noah showed us that growth isn't always flashy. It's slow, it's silent, but it's sacred. He stopped measuring his life in promotions and began honoring the version of himself that was being built, one choice, one breath, one self-aware step at a time. David proved that real strength isn't loud, it's intentional. By choosing his response instead of reacting from habit, he rewrote not just meetings or arguments, but the legacy he leaves in every room he enters. Emotional discipline became his quiet superpower, and Ava, with all her grace in the early morning quiet of a hospital ward, reminded us that legacy isn't what we leave behind in headlines, it's what we leave behind in hearts. She didn't need praise to know she mattered. Her impact was written in touch, in presence, in love. These stories aren't extraordinary because they feature fame, fortune, or perfection. They're extraordinary because they reflect the most sacred truth of Stoic philosophy. We cannot always control what happens to us, but we always control how we live through it. The lesson here is both timeless and urgent. Every day, you are choosing who you're becoming. Through the words you speak, the thoughts you nurture, the moments you stay grounded in, even the ones no one else sees. And those choices, they shape everything. So how do you apply this? Start small. Begin your morning with intention, not instinct. Tell yourself, I am ready. At midday, when self-doubt creeps in, remind yourself, I define my own worth. When you're overwhelmed, pause and whisper, I am here, now. Celebrate even your smallest acts of integrity by saying, I am becoming. And when life pushes you, remember, I choose my response. At the end of the day, reflect on something kind, something real, and know I matter. Now let's turn this to you. A simple question, no wrong answers, just a check-in with your inner compass. Which of these feels harder for you right now? A. Believing that you are enough. B. Staying present in the chaos. Comment A or B below. Let's talk about it. You never know who you might encourage just by sharing. What about you? Which story resonated most? What lesson will you carry into your tomorrow? Share it in the comments. Your perspective could be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story moved you, if you saw even a small part of yourself in Eliza, Jackson, Michelle, Noah, David, or Ava, then subscribe. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because it tells us you're out there, you're listening, you care about living deeply and wisely, and that gives us the reason to keep creating the next story for you.